Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Pacific Offshore Transmission Solutions work group here today. We appreciate your participation, and we feel like we've teed up some interesting topics for you today. Before we get into the main event, I did want to take just a couple moments here and talk generally about offshore wind, and also field any questions you might have about what's tracking anything related to offshore wind on the West Coast, and I'll do my best to answer. And there are other folks on the call here today that might be able to weigh in as well. So I'll start here with a little bit of update on offshore wind as it relates to California and Oregon. And again, feel free to ask any questions you might have. So some of you are involved in this sector very closely, and this is old news for you. But for the rest of us, California is planning to host auctions for 5 offshore wind lease areas on December 6th. And there are 2 sites in the North Coast in Humboldt, 3 sites in the South Coast of Morro Bay. They accommodate about 4.6 gigawatts of development. And we're very excited to see how that plays out on December 6th. There'll be 5 winners. BOEM has decided that one company can only win 1 lease. In the earlier version, in the proposed sale notice, they suggested that a company could win both North and the South. They did change their position on that. They also changed a significant piece that relates to the multi-factor auction mechanism. Again, you can find this in the final sale notice. If you Google BOEM final sale notice California, you'll find this language which shows up in the Federal Register. But one of the key issues there that I think was an improvement over the proposed sale notice was inclusion of 30% of the value of the lease is now going to be allocated across 3 or maybe 4, depending on how you think about it, categories. 10% of the lease value will go to supply chain, 10% for workforce development, and another 10% broken down into 5% buckets related to community benefit agreements for 5% for stakeholders affected by the actual area being used, i.e. the fishing community, as well as 5% from the local community that may be impacted by the development. So 30% of the lease value in the multi-factor auction is I think an improvement, and I think a lot of folks called for that, and provides more benefits flowing back into the local community. So again, 5 leases, December 6th, about 4.6 gigawatts. I think the thing we're all keen to see, of course, is what's going to be the value of those leases, and the companies are all kind of got their heads down, sharpening their pencils as we speak, and thinking about what they're going to be willing to bid on these sites. So I think that's going to be exciting to see it play out, and you can watch that in real time on December 6th at BOEM's website, and you can watch that lease play out as the companies continue to bid. It may go 2 days. I think that's the East Coast leases have taken 2 days to play out. I'm not sure that's going to happen in California. Anything about the California lease? Any questions there? Seeing none. AB 525, California, again, that's the legislation that was passed a year or so ago in California that is guiding the state's planning process around offshore wind. And AB 525, I think, has become extremely important. And you can look to AB 525 for an indication of just how seriously the state of California is taking offshore wind. One of the things that sort of a threshold question was what were going to be the planning goals. The legislature decided to kick that to the California Energy Commission to decide what those numbers would be. And after some amount of public debate, they settled on 5 gigawatts by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. These are great numbers. Personally, I think they exceeded what I expected to see, and it's driving the conversation. Now, they're planning goals, but I think they become de facto development goals, at least as I think the industry views those numbers as what they're going to be aspiring to. And so I think that's how they'll function moving forward. And I think it says a lot about California and the seriousness that that state is taking with regard to offshore wind, to see how much effort the state is putting into various aspects of AB 525, including procurement, for example. You know,
Hello.
there's
All right.
is there a question there? So you might want to mute. Hear some background discussion. So the procurement question: how do you bring on 4.6 gigawatts of wind, right? Especially in such large tranches, it doesn't fit the normal model. And so California refers these as long lead time resources. And the CPUC is currently debating how it is that they might accommodate that. And I think that's promising because the state may adopt some sort of mechanism that facilitates the procurement of offshore wind projects. I think Oregon will face the same situation at some point in time. Of course, they have very different systems, and so the California model may not be directly applicable, but perhaps California's experience will also shine a little light on Oregon and how we might address issues like procurement, transmission development, workforce development, supply chain development, port development, all the main issues associated with offshore wind. So very promising, a lot of work to be done in California. There are several groups that are focused on this, including Offshore Wind California, OWC, and ACP, American Clean Power. Those groups are all working together with the state to try to find good solutions to some of these more challenging issues. And personally, as I watch that play out, I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing in California, and I hope it bodes well for offshore wind on the West Coast. So I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any questions or additional comments about state of play with offshore wind. All right. Well, with that, then I'll go ahead and finish my comments today, and finish by letting you know that we're going to host a conference on offshore wind in Oregon on February 28th and March 1st in downtown Portland. We're calling it the Pacific Northwest Offshore Wind Conference. It'll be a poet-hosted event, pretty traditional in the sense that we're going to be focusing on some of the key issues associated with offshore wind. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. We're about to go live with that announcement, and we're pulling together a good agenda. I think that will help us look at some of these key issues that will be relevant with the Oregon, Washington, Northern California development area. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Bill Henry to introduce today's main speaker.
Thanks, Jason. So today we've got two presentations. First one from Andrea Hart with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities to share with us some information about the recent experience and not so recent aspects about building up momentum in the offshore wind industry there. And then following that, we'll have a presentation from Travis Douville with Pacific Northwest National Lab. He's going to join the meeting near the top of the hour and get into an update on their current study. So Jason, make sure that Andrea has sharing permission to get her presentation up.
Done.
And with that, I will hand it over to Andrea. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Jason. I'm thrilled to be here. I know New Jersey seems like a far away place for this team, and we certainly are in some regards, but I think there's much to be learned, and we're certainly excited to share some of the details. I will say it sounds like they're doing a bit of construction in the building, so if you hear some hammering, I'm safe. It's just quite loud. So with that, let me share my screen.
That looks good.
Okay, great. Terrific. Let me minimize you guys. So I'll start by going to the first slide to give a bit of background about myself. I'm Andrea Hart. I work for the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. We are, other states have PUCs, that's the same here. It's just we define ourselves as the Board of Public Utilities. And we are charged with really developing the offshore wind program here in the state. We'll go through a little bit of where we've been and what's on the horizon. I'm going to give a little bit of background on just our OREC and offshore wind program, because I think it lends a nice foundation to our transmission program, which I know that's what we're here to discuss. And we'll go from there. So the solicitation schedule that we've had in front of you, the board wrote the rules for the OREC mechanism, which is that the environmental attributes related to offshore wind procurement about, I want to say 5 years ago now. We issued our first solicitation in 2018 and then a second one in 2020. Those have resulted in 3 awards, and I'll give you a quick little map of those. And then we are just ramping up efforts for our third solicitation, which will occur in the beginning of next year. So we are full steam ahead and really realizing a lot of this offshore wind potential. So here we'll see, you'll see on the left, these are the lease areas. So this is what your waters will hopefully look like soon enough. We've got the 2 southern lease areas. Again, this is just for New Jersey. So there are other lease areas south of this, but this is just the purview that I'm interested in. We have this green and the light blue. This is what I'm interested in. We have this green and the light blue. It sounds like I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so I'll ask folks to mute themselves. It sounds like I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so I'll ask folks to mute themselves.
Yeah,
does anyone else
maybe it looks like maybe Ian Hogue's I see his microphone triggering. So
the green and the light blue are the existing projects. These are a NORCED project and an EDF project, EDF and Shell. And these were 2 existing lease areas that were purchased, gosh, I want to say like 8 years ago, and I think one of the nation's initial lease area auctions before any OREC mechanisms occurred. In February, BOEM issued its auction for the New York Bight area. It's a little bit of a misnomer because these are the new, hopefully you can see my mouse. These are the New York Bight lease areas. These went in February, these 6 lease areas, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for about $4.5 billion. We were all shocked by those numbers. It's certainly thrilling to see the interest and the market's response, phenomenal response. But then you're really thinking about, okay, well, who's paying for those lease areas? And ultimately it will be likely New York and New Jersey ratepayers. So we'll come full circle on this, I'm sure, at the end of this discussion on how to allocate costs and what those look like. But these are the new lease areas, so we certainly anticipate some of these new leaseholders eager to get those balance sheets up and running, bidding into our solicitation coming up early in January. So the picture on the right depicts, so we're going to transition to transmission. The picture on the right depicts the possible transmission interconnection routes from these new lease areas into New Jersey. We've kind of affectionately called this the spaghetti approach. So with this in mind, thinking about as we adding new lease areas and we're adding new projects, we're really starting to see some inefficiencies. So New Jersey began to explore the alternatives to this kind of transmission dilemma. I think, did I skip one slide? No, we're good. In New Jersey and other Mid-Atlantic states, PJM is our regional grid operator. They have rules that determine how and when we can expand and enhance the regional grid, and outlined and it's through a very competitive, pretty structured process, which determines which projects get built. New Jersey formally requested inclusion of its offshore wind public policy into this regional transmission expansion analysis at PJM. And to do this, that process is known as the state agreement approach. So you're going to see this SAA, the state agreement approach. The SAA is a tool offered by PJM for its member states to request transmission development needs based on policy requirements that would be incorporated into the RTEP process. Previously, no other state's done this. New Jersey is the first state to utilize the SAA. But by initiating a competitive solicitation for transmission projects from a broad pool of regional developers, the BPU is ensuring that New Jersey can select the most efficient and effective options available on the market, really in pursuit of this coordinated transmission solution to delivering offshore wind. PJM does provide a really robust competitive bidding process, and that really forces developers to propose lower costs and innovative proposals, ideally resulting in efficiencies and ratepayer savings. Opening the proposal window to all qualified PJM developers allows for a diversity of approaches and expertise that identifies an optimal grid with high benefits and low environmental impact. So I do want to talk about the cost allocation here. Under the previous solicitations, those first two solicitations, which resulted in 3 projects, the transmission costs associated with the offshore wind projects were entirely part of this OREC. That is a bundled approach. We had the wind farms and transmission associated, that bundle. The OREC is a fixed price over 20 years, and it's not really subject to change. It's kind of considered this like gold standard in terms of ratepayer protections. There are, unlike, we'll get into the details of how the SAA is paid for, but the transmission costs, which are within that umbrella or under that umbrella of the OREC, are really not subject to any cost overruns. So they're quite secure from a ratepayer perspective. Alternatively, under the SAA, so using the PJM approach to transmission, those transmission costs would be taken out of the OREC and put into the normal RTEP cost allocation process. That is accepted and approved by FERC, and there are permitted for cost caps and cost overruns, a bit different than the OREC. So New Jersey's public policy goal was for 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind. I will note that in the middle of the SAA solicitation, Governor Murphy increased our offshore wind goal to 11 gigawatts. But for the SAA, because the solicitation was already underway, we're really only accommodating that 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind. I'll come back to these overarching goals because they're fundamentally quite important. But as you move away from the spaghetti model and really have a coordinated transmission solution, our goals, New Jersey's goals, were really to minimize the environmental, permitting, and fishing impacts. We've got, just like most, I would say all states that have beaches and shores, they're highly coveted and really protected. There's environmental risks, fishing risks, and certainly community risks that go with crossing the shoreline. So how do you minimize those? We wanted to encourage competition for future wind farms and generators to help essentially lower costs ultimately, and to maximize transmission developer expertise. Under that bundled approach where you had offshore wind developers submitting for their OREC bids, including transmission, you have generators presenting transmission solutions. By taking transmission out of the equation and putting it in the hands of the PJM process, that really allows for expertise of those transmission to pull from that expertise from the transmission developers. That's really what we were seeking to do. So PJM with BPU staff, our board staff, developed the solicitation for the transmission projects under the SAA to meet New Jersey's offshore wind goals. The solicitation requested applications for 4 distinct options, which I'll show on my next slide, with each entity having the choice to propose more than one. What's important here is that under the SAA, the board is the ultimate decision maker, deciding which, if any, of the proposals proceed to construction. These projects were not likely to be pursued if they do not result in development of a lower cost, lower risk, or higher benefit option for interconnection and delivery of New Jersey's offshore wind. During the process, the BPU also had the ability to terminate the SAA process entirely if it was determined to be in the best interest of the state. Staff continues to work with PJM to ensure development of adequate ratepayer protection should any transmission project, as the transmission project was selected. So you'll see on the screen the solicitation details. We opened the window in 2021 and closed it in September 2021. And then I'll show you the 4 distinct options. So you'll see this is what we solicited. Keep in mind that these deans Smithburg, Larrabee, and Cardiff are just proposed points of interconnection, POIs, but bidders were invited to submit any flavor of POIs that they determined would be the best. So we've split it into essentially onshore upgrades and offshore upgrades. And so this option 1, which we split into 2, option 1A are upgrades to the existing grid. This looks like your normal transmission upgrades onshore. Option B, however, moves the grid closer to the shore, still onshore, but closer to the shore to accommodate easier connection for wind farms coming in from the east. Traditionally our grid on the East Coast moves east to west. So, excuse me, from west to east. So a lot of the grid along the shoreline is not robust and certainly not capable of handling the level of injections that we're seeking to inject. So bringing that grid closer to shore. So this could entail brand new substations right along the shoreline. So then we move offshore, and these are the option 2s. The option 2s really extend the grid out into the ocean to interconnect wind farms. And then the option 3 is what we've referred to, and I think the community is now pretty familiar with this, as backbone. What this is really interconnecting different offshore wind farms among one another. And I think it's pretty well known that this has substantial reliability benefits, and you can also maximize revenues in creative ways here. So these were the 4 options that we solicited from bidders, and they were welcome to do one or any variety of these 4. Now, when we were developing the SAA solicitation with PJM, this, novel, never been done before. It's a budding industry. We were a little nervous that all this work was going to be for naught. We weren't going to get any response. We were thinking, gosh, if we got 5 bids, this would be ideal. If we got 10, that would be amazing. So at the close of the solicitation, we got 80 proposals from 13 different bidders. We were floored. We were ecstatic, and then we were overwhelmed. So it really was the phenomenal response was, obviously a very positive indicator that New Jersey was doing something right, that the market said this is the right time. And it really allowed for, I think, enormously cost competitive solutions that came in as the response was so phenomenal. Really, we got phenomenal creativity, novel proposals. So I think the time is now. The market is ready. Folks are prepared to respond to these enormous challenges and really meet those needs. I won't dwell on this. I think this slide kind of speaks for itself, but it is helpful to see kind of who you'll see some players that you are likely familiar with and some that you might not be, but you'll start to see the responses that we got and what kind of proposals we got. As a reminder, these ones, the options 1s are the onshore upgrades. The option 2 is bringing that grid out into the ocean, and the option 3 is the backbone. So the backbone is kind of that pie in the sky. I think it's a bit premature, but we certainly wanted to see what folks had to say about it. And some developers took us up on that, and we did get some pretty strong option 3 proposals. So it's quite exciting. After the excitement of getting the 80 proposals, we then had a huge, sigh of relief, and then a huge sigh of what do we do now and how do we approach the evaluation here? We had enormously close coordination with PJM. Really, I would say never before done coordination with PJM, which was, they were truly a partner in this. So I would say without that kind of support and close coordination, this kind of approach would never have unfolded, and it just wouldn't work. We also coordinated with our sister state agencies, the Department of Environmental Protection and the Division of Rate Council, which is our ratepayer advocacy group here. I want to go into a little bit of detail. I know there's a lot of text on the slide, so I apologize, but talking about the evaluation, those first 2 bullets, the overarching SAA goals and the baseline scenario, I'll touch on briefly. We evaluated the proposals kind of in 2 steps. First is whether they achieved these overarching SAA goals, which I shared previously. And then we also talked about this baseline scenario. And what the baseline scenario is the status quo. So if the proposals don't beat the status quo, that spaghetti model or what would have been without the SAA, I don't think the board would have moved forward with a selection. So this development of our best guess estimate of what the future might look like is really this baseline scenario. You can imagine it's enormously complex, it's complicated, but really this was kind of the baseline of what we wanted to beat. And so these two bullets, the overarching SAA goals and the baseline scenario, was kind of that first initial process in the evaluation. So if a proposal didn't meet our goals and didn't beat the baseline, we moved on to the next proposal to evaluate. The second part of our evaluation was really upholding this criteria. We had 10 criteria. This has been distilled down here into really 5 that we issued with PJM. And so once a project kind of met these two first threshold questions, they met our goals, and then they were better than the baseline scenario. We then really worked about the evaluation criteria to compare projects against one another. This is where I think developers get very, very interested in seeing what their projects did against others. So this has been, very not contentious, but you want to be very thoughtful and deliberate when you're talking about your evaluation criteria. We also did our normal stakeholder process. We hosted 4 stakeholder meetings. Obviously, there's an enormous amount of interest in this. And then we also posed clarifying questions to bidders throughout the process. So the evaluation results, this happened at October 26th, so very, very recently. This was, our deliberation applications were due September 2021, so just 13 months of evaluation. And I have to say, it was down to the wire. It sounds like a year is a long time. It was an enormous undertaking. And that's certainly because of the response we received, but it's also quite complicated and obviously novel. So our evaluation results, which came out October 26th, and I'd be happy to share our board decision there if folks are interested in seeing it. But at the conclusion of staff's analysis, it was determined that unfortunately, none of those option 2 proposals offered sufficient benefits for the state to garner staff's recommendation to proceed. They didn't really improve upon the baseline, and I'll go into why. And as a reminder, those option 2 proposals extended the grid out into the ocean. So first, the option 2 designs that we received would predominantly connect only a single project at an offshore substation, rather than connect multiple offshore wind farms and bringing them ashore. This resulted in no real reduction in the baseline scenario. So due to the technological limitations of these offshore wind substations, they could really only accommodate 12 to 1,500 megawatts, and that's about the size of each of our projects. So each project would have its own offshore substation and then bring it ashore. So again, there's really no efficiencies against the baseline. We are thinking in the future that will increase, so you'll be able to collect more than one farm, offshore wind farm, and bring it ashore. But at this time, none of the proposals we received allowed for that. A second reason why we didn't think an option 2 proposal was right for us at this time was currently the transmission-only projects do not qualify for the 30% federal investment tax credit. This credit is available to generation projects. So if offshore wind generators, as part of their project, construct the transmission necessary to bring their respective projects onshore, costs for these systems, having been part of the project's capital investments, are eligible for that 30% ITC. That same cable, however, if built by a transmission operator and developer, is not available for that ITC. Staff remains certainly optimistic that the cost of this coordinated transmission will continue to decrease and could open the door for procurement of an option 2 facility through future SAA solicitation. So whether that means the federal ITC is available for these transmission-only projects, or these transmission-only projects are essentially 30% or more cheaper than the status quo, that would be potentially a good fit. The last is that there's, a large amount of project-to-project risk. For the OREC, for generators, in order to get paid, our OREC, our rule, only pays them for when electrons are delivered to the grid. So there's an enormous amount of project-on-project risk that generators were a bit queasy about handing the reins to transmission developers to interconnect them to the grid. So for example, worst case scenario, they build their wind farm, but the transmission solution isn't ready. The wind farm's sitting there and they're not able to receive those OREC payments. So generators were quite queasy about being fully reliant on a transmission developer to have that project available at the time that they needed it by. And I will note, none of the bidders proposed an incentive structure that would tie the cost recovery of the transmission facilities to the operational performance of the facilities. So the option 3 proposals, and again, this is the backbone, link the offshore wind projects together in what is usually referred to as that backbone. And at this time, they really didn't have sufficient benefits to outweigh the costs. And not to mention the option 3 proposals were linked to an option 2, their option 2 proposal. So if we weren't going to go with an option 2, we really couldn't select an option 3 at this time. I think with the new 11 gigawatt goal announcement, I think this provides certainly the opportunity for exploration and potentially future SAAs to support this increased goal and these option 2s and option 3s, provided potentially there's some tax policy changes and additional funding streams there. So we are optimistic. All right, so getting down to the fun part, the option 1s, which are the onshore upgrades. We found that they were very cost competitive against the status quo, and I'll get into actual numbers in a minute. We found that it enables significant point of interconnection benefits. We found that they increase the competition for future solicitations that would be utilizing the SAA solution. And it found that it really limits those onshore transmission routes, which, as you recall, that was one of our overarching goals, is to limit the number of routes, cabling routes, certainly onshore. Keeping in mind, too, that in doing just an option 1, whether it's 1A and 1B, onshore upgrades, those offshore cables would still qualify for the ITC because they will be bundled with future OREC generators proposals. Oops. Oh, excuse me, guys. Did I lose you?
You're still live. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I have like a rogue mouse that's keeping things fun. Okay. So at the end of, like I said, the beginning of last month, I'm sorry, at the end of last month, October 26th, the staff made a recommendation and the board unanimously accepted this Layer B dry collector solution. I know that doesn't mean anything to these folks, but I could go in a little bit of what this is. It was a jointly submitted proposal by JCP&L and MAOD. MAOD is actually, their parents are EDF and Shell. So some of those names might ring a bell. And it was a new substation next to actually an existing substation pretty close to shore. It's about 12, I think it's 9 miles as the crow flies, but approximately it's going to be about a 12-mile cable route from shore to the new substation. Keeping in mind when we talk about an SAA solution, it's really a package of proposals. So this was kind of the star of the proposal, but it also came with a suite, I want to say 13 other grid upgrades. So 13 other smaller projects that would accompany this, package of a solution. So that's those associated option 1A upgrades. So the cost for this solution, which includes this new substation and the affiliated 1A upgrades, the existing grid upgrades, was about 1.8 billion for the full solution. I know that sounds like an enormous amount of money, and it certainly is. But what we found is against the baseline, it saves ratepayers approximately $900 million. There's actually some additional savings there that are hard to quantify. But I do want to note that we were still leaving approximately $2.2 billion on the table in ITC credits, that if we were to choose an option 2, that we would have left those off the table. So this $900 million does not include access to potentially $2.2 billion in ITC credit. There's also some ancillary benefits to here too that we touched on, is that we maximized the location of the substation best suits the future offshore wind projects, as you saw in those lease areas. So it's centrally located. There was ancillary benefits in addition to this 900 million. Thinking about how to limit onshore cable routes, one of our major goals of the SAA, as you recall, was to minimize these onshore cable routes from the wind farms once they hit the beach to their point of interconnection. Our SAA selection in itself provides for a single POI onshore, though it does not necessarily limit the number of cable routes, since each wind project will still have to make their way from their project to that POI. So we're really struggling with how to limit these onshore cable routes. So to achieve this goal of limiting the onshore cable routes, we came up with this novel concept that we deemed the pre-build. What the pre-build proposes is to have one of the awarded projects in our upcoming solicitation 3 to pre-build the necessary infrastructure for its own project, but also all future projects that will utilize the SAA's solution at this singular POI. This infrastructure would be part of the OREC, so outside of the SAA, and would include the duct banks and cable vaults for its own project, as well as 2 to 3 future projects. This infrastructure would be unenergized, so I think of it as like the scaffolding. And so what this means is that future projects would then just have to pull their transmission cables through the pre-built infrastructure. This really results in a single construction effort, which would still be utilized by 3 to 4 future projects. And it really limits this onshore disruptions. So we will be implementing this in our 3rd solicitation. And again, this is fully outside of the SAA, but this concept was critical in the SAA decision. So the next steps is PJM will approve the selection of the SAA projects in December, and it will go into the RTIP process. PJM and the awarded developers of the SAA will execute the DEAs. And then PJM will really manage these projects just as any other transmission project. So it's nice that it will kind of flow right into PJM's standard process. I think what this team might be really interested in talking about, well, how do you apply some of these lessons here? And what are some of our lessons learned as we are moving forward? And I think New Jersey, a bit of a pioneer here, and we're happy to pave the way, but I think there's a lot to learn. And, certainly this is why we're here to share some of these tidbits. We do anticipate seeking another SAA. We thought we already would as we initiated the first SAA, but, in the midst of the solicitation, the governor increased the goal by 3.5 gigawatts. And so then it really solidified that a second SAA would be warranted. So I think that is certainly on the horizon. Keeping in mind that, New Jersey is, neighbors New York, who also has, aggressive offshore wind targets, but they are not in PJM. They're in a different RTO. So we really talk about this regional coordination, and I do not have the answer for that. I think that's a hot question. I think I just came from a offshore wind transmission conference down in Charleston, and it's a tricky subject. It's going to be tough, and certainly there's a lot of politics involved in this regional coordination. I touched on, pretty thoroughly the federal funding availability, the qualification of transmission-only projects for the ITC. And, now there's even opportunities for, whether the IRA can be applied to these kind of projects and things like that. And these are all yet to be determined. And then I think too, there's going to be technological advancement. So those limitations of the 12 to 1500 megawatts of collector stations offshore, I think are going to grow, and we'll be able to collect more and more of these projects offshore and bring them on shore in a more consolidated fashion. So that really sums things up from that's my deck here. And I think now we're going to pause to answer questions.
Absolutely. So it's odd. I seem like I have everyone muted, but I still hear some gentlemen speaking in the background. So
that might be mine. It might be my
okay.
office mates.
Well,
yeah.
Good. I'm glad I wasn't just being crazy here. Andrea, that was great. What an excellent opportunity for us to learn from the East Coast and the work that smart folks are doing to to facilitate offshore wind development and reduce impacts and of course, cost to ratepayers. So really appreciate you taking time today to share your experience, and I definitely want to open it up now to hopefully a healthy Q&A. So I want to hand it to Bill. Bill Henry, go ahead and lead the Q&A. I'm sure you have a few questions as well yourself.
I do, but let's before that, let's open it up to everybody on the call. So yeah, raise your hand and we'll call on you. Looks like we got a hand raised from Eric Hale.
Hi, hi, Andrea. I really liked your presentation, very informative. What's the role of the incumbent utilities in New Jersey? It seems like it's state agencies that are taking the lead on this. And I know this is kind of a complicated question, but I'd just be interested in your thoughts in how, you know, the old Atlantic electric system and so forth, because that's where you have to end up landing your interconnections. So interested in your thoughts on that. And thank you again.
No, yeah, I appreciate it. It's a great question. So it's a critical question. So yes, incumbents have the right to build, what is it, right of first refusal. So going through the normal PJM process, one of the reasons why it took so long is a lot of the proposals we received had to be temporarily put on the back burner for PJM to go out and communicate with the incumbent developers to see would they be able to like basically match beat. Yeah, they have a standard process for this. So yes, they are entitled to that. Coincidentally, the project we selected is an incumbent utility developer transmission line. So that is a role. And that's, you know, one note about utilizing the existing PJM process or the RTO process or ISO is that they have these rules in place. You're kind of shoehorning this public policy into that. But once you kind of get in there and do some minor tweaks, you're really able to go on this well-oiled machine that's been tested and, you know, standardized. So I found a lot of comfort in that we weren't really marching at this alone, that we were utilizing this existing process, even though there were some tweaks that had to be made for the public policy.
Okay, any more questions, comments? I guess with that, I'll go with one you know, just observation that I have about, you know, thinking through how a solicitation or, you know, an effort like this could be initiated from the beginning. I think to me, there's a challenge in determining how much of the, you know, the creative solution space gets baked into the development of the solicitation itself, and then how much gets included in the asking for creative responses. So on either bookend, it's designing a specific thing and asking the market to build that thing, or on the other hand, it's setting forth the problem statement with a broad brush and asking you know, the parties to bring forth their solutions. So I'm not sure, maybe 80 of them is a large number, but do you have any general thoughts on that? You know, just that overall concept. If you know, here on the West Coast, we have to make some of those decisions, you know, in the beginning, and which side of that should we steer towards?
Gosh, I wish I had it's another great question. I wish I had an easy answer. I have my personal opinion, which is, you know, I work for the state, and the best we can do is set up the bookends, some parameters, you know, in between, and then get out of the way. If you have such a phenomenal response, like the competition, really letting the market come in, helping to drive down prices, which will always be our biggest goal, is to drive down prices. I think the only way the offshore wind world is going to succeed is to see costs come down. Right, states will subsidize these enormous investments for so long, and then ratepayers are going to get tired of it. And so the only way for us to really gain that momentum and to see it grow is to bring down costs. That's not to say you don't take into enormous consideration community environmental impacts. There's also the issue of economic development, which we can get to. But that said, so what we try to do, certainly in the SAA and definitely in our OREC solicitations, is to provide enough flexibility for developers to submit bids that they think are going to be best for their business case, their projects, the technology, and hope that they're really, you know, fighting to come in at the lowest cost possible. but to allow enough rigidity that we get the projects we want. And we can be choosy in selecting only from really strong projects that we receive. So it doesn't really answer your question. I think it's a mixture, a hybrid in each state. And, we constantly have this, this will be my third solicitation that I'm involved in. I'm leading the solicitation, and it's just always a struggle to see how much detail we give and how much we leave up to the market and bidders to be creative and get those novel approaches. But I always lean towards allowing maximum flexibility, really getting out of developers' way, provided we have enough safeguards in place.
Yeah, that's I think that's very important context to think through, ensuring that whatever is set forth does have a very robust response, and making sure that you have that in place. And another
Well, I was going to say, after the results of the decision came out, developers were saying, well, if we had known an option 2 wasn't going to be on the table, we would have, figured out our, stronger onshore upgrades. And I certainly agree. So I think then the market is saying, well, we wanted a bit more. And I think they'll get a bit more feedback of exactly what we want, but this is going to be an evolution of what, as we learn, as we see what's out there. And so I think, in this case, the market really said that they did want a bit more detail. And I think we hope to deliver that in the next SAA.
Any more questions, comments, discussion? I'm not sure if Travis has joined us yet, but we have.
He has.
Okay. We have time for more discussion on this topic.
I'll ask a question. I'm curious. I saw, Andrea, you talked about impacts, and it seemed like there was a preference, if you like, for onshore impacts or mitigating those impacts. And I guess historically, when I think about transmission related planning, and we think of the spaghetti issue of developers, each building their respective gen-tie to shore. Those are the impacts that I've historically considered or worried about, and we're trying to minimize those. Maybe talk to us a little bit about your experience there, and the fact that you did focus on the shore side implications. And you're still left with, effectively, with these improvements, the maybe I don't know, I don't want to overstate it, but just sort of the reality of having so many cables coming to shore for each developer sort of managing their own issues.
Yeah, it was somewhat sad. Maybe that's the right word. It was just sad that we really did want to seek to limit cable routes from the wind farms all the way to the POI. But that certainly, it just was not, based on the proposals we received, not in the cards. The limitation of the offshore substations to really only connect that 12 to 1500 megawatts resulted kind of de facto in existing spaghetti. So that said, thinking ahead, so now that we have the solution that we have, thinking ahead to the OREC solicitations that will utilize the SAA solution, how do we really mitigate the impacts of the offshore cable routes? So keeping in mind that these projects are still need to go through lengthy federal and state permitting processes. And then each solicitation, we incorporate actually a bit more stringent requirements. So essentially minimum requirements that in order to even bid into this, they'll have to abide by. That takes pretty close coordination with our state DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, to create essentially minimum requirements, gating requirements that each of them must consider. I think it also is an opportunity. This infrastructure is out in the ocean. So how do you put potentially monitoring technology on this to really maximize the intel we're getting? And so you're going to see likely more requirements there of having to use, what do they call them? They're essentially like torpedoes that, course the bottom of the ocean to pick up data. And we're going to require that data to be incorporated and utilized publicly. And there will also be likely monitoring equipment on the actual turbines to collect data. So our goal is as we are still kind of stuck with this spaghetti approach, we're hoping to not only decrease the impacts that have, as we learn, but also see what we can't collect data and learn from the existing projects. So moving forward, we can really decrease those impacts.
Thank you. I see Arnie has his hand up, but I also saw earlier Chip had his hand up. Chip, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, I do kind of, in the implementations you've adopted, is it doing enough upgrades on the onshore transmission system to accommodate the overall final maximum amount of power coming out of the wind turbines? Or are they steps that will just accommodate a certain amount and have to be torn down and replaced when you increase the wind?
It's a good question. Definitely will not have to be torn down or replaced. So our solution will accommodate the original goal of this 7.5 gigawatts. I can get into the specifics of how the arrangement will work, but that's going to be approximately three projects in the 1200 to 1500 megawatt range. That's about three projects that this solution will accommodate, meaning those projects will be, we will ask for them to bid into our OREC solicitation, knowing that there's a transmission solution waiting ready for them to interconnect to. And that will be about 3 to 4 projects. After that, we will have to initiate a second SAA and have a second solution. So it wouldn't result in the tearing down of any of this infrastructure, but the adding to. So, I mean, historically, transmission in this country is done almost on a piecemeal basis. When there's a violation or a reliability issue, that's when transmission is built. And so what we're really trying to do is, it's common sense. We all know that this is we see this on the horizon, this generation's coming. How do we coordinate this and have it ready and waiting there? And that's just not how transmission is really built in this country, unfortunately. Or the tools that we're using are, slightly antiquated, and we're trying to utilize, the existing tools in our toolbox, which aren't ideal for the world that we are marching towards, certainly an offshore resource. So the SAA is one tool that we can use. And again, it's not ideal. It's not, when the SAA was issued and accepted by FERC, it wasn't thought that it would be used in this manner. So we are trying to a little bit shoehorn existing tools. And I think this is one way to do it. I think it's an amazing start, and I'm interested to see, how there's additional creative solutions and where this goes. But, it's a big endeavor to accommodate this new resource and bring it on shore in a way that makes sense.
Well, one of the key issues, I'm a retired transmission planner from Pacific Corp. And one of the things that we were very careful to do is, if we're going to build something, it's an incremental piece of a long-term plan. And one of the issues you get with inland transmission is right away. Nobody wants a transmission line that they can see. It's a lot easier to upgrade and rebuild an existing line than it is to add a new one. A new one is like 10-year lead time. And so one of the key plans that we have is, if you're going to spend the money to upgrade something, increase the voltage on it, increase the conductor size and new structures, that you do that for the long haul and not for an incremental capacity increase. And on our West Coast, I can see the issues with, choke points like you have on inland transmission, because it's currently feeding pretty light loads. But if you're going to be looking at 11 gigawatts or more of generation, then you need to start building incrementally the components that are needed to support that. And I think should be an integral part of the planning.
I think so too. I think that's one of the challenges as well. And then figuring out who pays for this. So we are looking at 230 to 500 kV lines. So they're not tiny. I would say those are good size to accommodate this, but looking at, who pays for this. So, is one of the fundamental cruxes, right? We want these lines and, they're expensive. So right now under the SAA, New Jersey is solely responsible for those upgrades, even though some of those upgrades will occur on land outside of New Jersey borders, and residents of other states will receive those benefits. but it becomes kind of a push and pull, and there's politics involved, unfortunately, which thankfully are over my head, but it leads to the complexity and challenges. And I think you touch on something that's really critical that we need to certainly work on. And I think that will really come into that regional coordination and how do we build, things that are going to meet our future needs here.
Appreciate that. Let's make sure we get 2 more hands up here. Arnie Jacobson.
Sure. Thank you, Andrea, very much. Really appreciated the presentation. One of the concerns that I've heard come up here on the West Coast in association with the idea of an offshore backbone that has fewer points of interconnection coming on shore is that coastal communities fear being bypassed in terms of receiving transmission reliability benefits. And transmission reliability or just grid reliability is a major concern with a lot of the coastal communities here. I don't know if that, I'd be curious to hear if that issue came up at all on the in New Jersey and just how that was thought about in that context, if it did come up.
I'm smiling because we had the opposite problem. Our shore communities would love to be bypassed. We've run into a significant amount of opposition from our shore communities for those first 3 projects that are being awarded and are, by themselves bringing their transmission on shore. Pretty substantial community pushback, even though these cables are coming under the shore and using existing rights of way, most of which will be underground. They're still just this really digging their heels in. And I think it has to do a lot with the visual impacts, which, don't have anything to do with transmission. They have to do with, the perceived impacts to property values of windmills off their coast. So no, we didn't actually have any comments or feedback regarding reliability concerns and shore communities being overlooked. That said, New Jersey is incredibly densely populated, and it's a pretty small state. So most of our population is in the north; it's not in the south. And the project we selected will accommodate that. There's really not reliability issues right now along the shore because the populations just really aren't there.
Arnie, you raised an important issue. We're very cognizant of that. That is a common theme on the south coast of Oregon. I'd love to pick that up maybe later and talk about how do we address that. Many of the small communities are expecting to see improvements to their grid reliability from this. And if a backbone line with only 2 connection points does in fact eliminate that, that would be unfortunate, of course, and I'd love to explore that a little bit more, but let's keep going. Eric, you're next.
Yeah, Andrea, one question on this. You talked about the permitting process, that your projects now have to get permitted. Do you have a mechanism in mind by which you will adjust your current plan to some of the realities that you run into in the permitting process? I'm involved in my day job in permitting transmission lines quite regularly, and quite often you have to make adjustments as you go along. Is that part of your thinking already?
It certainly is. The permitting of transmission lines is so challenging, and it has such it's apt for risk and delays. And what happens, we found, is that due to the transmission component of building these wind farms, you'll see these risk premiums, essentially, like the risk of delays, everything baked into an OREC price. So if we can start to chip away at those risks, I think we're going to see that OREC price really come down. That 900 million in savings, that's one of the ancillary benefits we hope to see, is that we've now taken a big chunk of the transmission risk out of the OREC, and we're hoping to see this. But yes, to answer your question, permitting presents it's so critical, but it presents a huge challenge here. And so projects that utilize existing rights of way, which they do, and, are predominantly underground, are going to be favored.
Yeah. All I can say is good luck with it. I'm on your side.
We appreciate it. It's like any large infrastructure project that goes in, it's going to be an enormous lift. And I think it's one big puzzle piece, but, we're slowly trudging through it.
Okay, last question. We got one more here from Brian, then we can move on here.
Andrea, I'd like to thank you for giving the presentation. My question comes down to cross-state boundaries and transmission and how you're dealing with that question. We have a situation here where we have a field which is considered Brookings, which will come up in September for lease of this coming year. And we have the Del Norte region of that same field, which will be developed later on. But yet they could both utilize the same transmission facilities. And the question is Brookings used to be part of our transmission, that then went to Goose Prairie, which was further north by about 160 miles. So the question is have you had situations where you're getting across the state line with respect to transmission, and how you guys are dealing with that? That's my question.
So let me clarify here. This is two different, one existing call area and one potential future call area, one in Oregon, one future area in off of California waters.
So actually, I had an idea.
I appreciate that. So maybe similar here is, we have these, I can maybe pull back up, but the New York bike lease areas, which went for that astronomical one, approximately $1.5 billion. Sorry about the background noise. Can go into New York, New Jersey. I mean, hell, if they want to go to Florida, they can. They just got to build a transmission there. But New Jersey will only pay for it if they deliver it onshore. The POI does have to be in New Jersey. So we're kind of in a little bit of a race against New York to get those lease areas. So it leads New Jersey to want to create a really competitive edge against New York, have folks bid into us because they really can go to New York or New Jersey. But at this, so we're competing against these two states are essentially competing against those lease areas, but they will only get paid the New Jersey OREC if they interconnect to New Jersey and serve New Jersey ratepayers. I don't know if that answers your question, but good. I'll take it.
All right. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for your presentation. That was very informative. I hope that you will continue the hard work there, continue to have some successes and make some mistakes so that we on the West Coast here can learn from you before we start building. So thank you so much. You're welcome to stay. We have a presentation now from Travis Douville from Pacific Northwest National Labs. Bill, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, Travis, do you have a presentation to share?
I do, yeah. Can I share?
Yes.
All right. Let me know how that's coming across, and I can make it a little bit bigger here.
Looks great.
Does it look okay?
Yes.
All right. Yes, and thanks to Andrea, because I have to say it's interesting that the New Jersey Reach, they're clearly thought leaders, because I was just on the phone right before I hopped over to this call with Abe Silverman, who might be who's speaking in the background there, on a workshop, convening workshop.
That's funny,
So
yes. I work closely with Abe.
yeah, that's really funny. Anyways, I missed some of your presentation today, but I think I saw some of that material last week, and it's really informative, I think, to how we might capture this opportunity better in various regions around the country. So yeah, just a quick, folks, thanks for joining. Just a quick, we have, I think, about 25 minutes left. Is that right, Bill? A little less, maybe?
Yeah, well, we can go right to 11:30.
Yeah, okay, no sweat, right to 11:30. Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining. And this is just a quick update on our research project. Some of you have seen some of this material before. The team many of these folks are on the call. So what I hope to do is give a quick update for you folks and then reserve some time. We'll get some good questions from this audience, I'm sure. I see some fellow researchers out there. So then we'll have some of the people who are actually doing this work on a day-to-day basis able to chime in and help answer questions. And we very much appreciate your feedback as we go. If you're seeing something we're missing, if you have a question, something's not clear, please, you can stop me as we go. I'm fine with that as well. But yeah, I just want to acknowledge that this is a team effort. So very, very tight agenda today. Just a reminder of what this project is. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of our early scenario one. We have 3 scenarios. You'll see that explained again. in a few minutes here, but give some initial kind of show you folks where we are with defining these things. And Arnie, I think this will be interesting to you, and maybe we'll have another conversation about these things in detail in a week or so. But kind of give a sense for where we're going with defining these offshore wind generation plus transmission designs, and then some early results so far and the next steps. Okay, so this project is an 18-month project kicked off at the beginning of this year. It is funded by the National Offshore Wind Research and Development Consortium and also by BOEM, which has enabled us to scrutinize power flows into the Bay Area. But the original Now RDC project was really to focus on this potential generation region from what has become the north end of the Coos Bay Call area down through the south end of the Humboldt lease areas. And the key pieces of this project are the development and application of a system valuation methodology, which is somewhat indicated by this lower right image. If you wanted to know more about that, or you missed the technical report that defines that valuation methodology, please let us know. Always happy to take thoughts on shaping that and things that could be improved as we go forward. Applying it is we're going to learn a lot by trying to apply it. I think it's not a straightforward activity, but we think it's an interesting way to look at the technical economic valuation picture. And then we have defined the scope as evaluating in this kind of zone that's highlighted in the orange region here in this image. The evaluation of 3 conceptual, what we're calling them scenarios. What that really means is generation and transmission designs that are evaluated on a certain representation of the Western interconnection. So in some of these studies, you hear the word scenario used to maybe define like a low carbon scenario or some kind of future trajectory of a generation mix. Here, it's simple. All we mean is generation plus transmission plus a representation of the WEC. That's a combination of those 3 things defines a scenario for us. And there are 3 of those. They must span 2 representations of the Western interconnection, 2 future representations of the Western interconnection. And we will pull from the set of potential transmission being incremental land-based transmission upgrades, new high voltage land-based transmission, or offshore high voltage transmission. And then the project is guided by groups such as this one, but not exclusively. But poet industry groups, the IAG also helps us stay on track here. But it's definitely not a transmission planning study. So you may have read that. That's important to note. This is certainly a research study that's looking at the potential value of an area and transmission that can deliver generation benefits. Okay, so we have these 3 scenarios. The update today is really focused around sharing with you folks where we are on defining these things and where we are in the analysis effort of both from a production cost and a power flow perspective. So the first scenario, and this is just a cartoon, these are just schematics kind of indicating roughly, these are not actually what the cable runs look like, I promise. But we have identified a set of buses, substations in Southern Oregon, exclusively for this scenario, which are capable with some system upgrades we've identified through not only production cost money, which is kind of the work to date, in the literature, but also power flow modeling to define contingency performance of this transmission under contingency events, and through a full AC power flow evaluation. We've identified that we can get about this much in here. It totals to about 2,700 megawatts of power flow through these buses. And I'll show you more detail in a moment, but you can see that most of it's coming out of Coos Bay. So the best wind resource by the windrows, right, is down here in Brookings. But unfortunately, and then also in Humboldt. But unfortunately, the transmission is really, really, really a limitation there. And at least on this initial scenario, which is built on top of the WEC ADS 2030 case, we are limiting the generation options to where there is transmission and maybe leaning a little bit into Brookings, but that's it. And even this Brookings smaller amount of generation requires a bit of a build out north to go through Fairview. And folks on the phone know that from prior work as well. But one thing we've hit when we start doing the actual power flow modeling is we've realized that there really is not an established equivalent collector system model for these wind parks. So I know we went from kind of high level to we dove pretty deep there. But I will just tell you that this is something that I have to give credit to Bill on the phone here for guiding us and talking to industry. That 66 kV is sort of the collector system. I guess kind of what the industry is collapsing upon for offshore wind collector systems, and that's a lot higher voltage than what I'm used to for land-based parks. But it makes sense when you think about the scale of the machines. So we've basically, Shanawaz on the phone here has helped define collector system kind of modules that can build up to the various megawatt limits that we want to model coming off of each lease area or each generation area in the ocean, which we can talk to in a moment. But you can see that the basic tenets here are, we're doing 5 or so 15 MVA turbines per string per feeder, and then lumping those up into an equivalent 225 MVA wind generator. And then we do kind of blocks of that to represent the equivalent collector system and get the dynamics of the full balance of plant system into our power flow models. And we've done those. So we've done that. Oh, the one more thing to mention about this scenario, just to make it sure it's really clear. You might notice although I did say these aren't exactly the way that we're routing ocean interconnection transmission equipment. We are, though, the endpoints are correct on this image. So we are running these from the centroids of the Coos Bay call area and from the centroid of the Brookings call area. And the reason for that has to do, that's unrealistic, but the reason for that is because we've been requested to not indicate one preferential portion of the call area over another. So we'll just keep it high level for now in terms of this near-term scenario, ADS 2030. What we're doing is we're just modeling equivalent collector system. We're using average wind characteristics based on 20 years of hourly hub height wind data, synthetic data across this entire call area. But then we're kind of bringing it all down to one representative location, and then routing the transmission from there. So the losses through the transmission lines, which are AC radials in this case, 230 kV, those are all based on the runs from the centroid to the substations that are mentioned here. And just some quick preliminary results out of we lost an image there. What happened? Did I do that? This is path 5. Sorry, folks. I hope I didn't delete an image. But this is path 5. So this is the flow gate into the cross Cascades flow gate into kind of from south, from Washington and through the Cascades into the kind of the I-5 corridor in Oregon. And what we see when we add this 2.7 gigawatts, perhaps not a shock, that we see reduced flow, those imports into the kind of I-5 corridor through that path. And this is the monthly average flow, and here's the hourly average flow. And it's a fairly consistent offset in all hours. And then we also pay attention to these interregional flows are really important. So we're tracking those. In particular, it's path 65 and 66, and with 66 being the COE, and so keep that one in mind, because that's the one that when we think about wildfire impact, that might be one we might really look at later. But and then path 65 being the DC intertie. So they're broken up here. Top row is path 65. You can see when we add the 2.7 gigawatts of offshore wind, there are some increased. In this case, in this ADS 2030 case, I don't know that we saw it to this extent before. There are some increased flows into California, but remember, these are 2.71. If people are thinking, hey, there are past studies that show, maybe 2.5 gigawatts of offshore wind into Oregon, it doesn't really change the import picture much. These aren't 2.7 gigawatts of nameplate. This is 2.7 gigawatts of power flow. So it's even more than what you may have seen before, maybe closer to 3.5 gigawatts or so of nameplate capacity in the ocean. Okay, so there's, you can see some offsets, some increased imports into California from even this scenario 1 case, and that's true of both interties. Perhaps a bigger issue in the kind of the later half of the year, and of course not right during the midday when there's plenty of solar production in California, and there's not really a need for the imports. Okay, and then looking at the coast, back to the comment that was made at the end of Andrea's presentation, or the end of the Q&A there. There's power reversal across all these major corridors: Fairview to Reston, Reston, Dixville, Lane to Wensden. These are some that we've scrutinized in the past. This is not a surprise, but this does underlie some coastal benefits. Now, these are all production cost modeling results, so there's more to scrutinize here from a power flow perspective, but this is what we have done so far. And then I want to tell people about this resilience work and I want to highlight especially Costas on the phone and Lee Hay, who've done this work, driven this work. What we've tried to do is recreate. This is all inspired. Let me back up. This is all inspired by the July 2021 bootleg fire in Southern Oregon, which ended up causing the de-energization of the California Oregon path, that path I mentioned earlier. And that happened in the middle of an unseasonably, an unusually warm time regionally, particularly in California, where they were highly reliant upon the imports. And at the same time, it's kind of like a double hit. At the same time, there was the smoke was causing arcing off the COE line and had to be de-energized, and then the DC line had to be energized. So it was really, I think people have short memories maybe, but and nothing really ended up happening for a lot of folks, but it very nearly was catastrophic, I think, in California. I don't know if Kaiso's on the phone or what they would have to say about that, but to me, it was a major eye-opener, kind of a major, kind of reminder of how important these interregional flows are north to south. Now, even though those are shifting, they're not always north to south like they used to be. We do want to try to model that stress case. So the way we've done that is we've collected this historic cooling degree day information, and we've computed a load increase factor and applied that to the hourly California demand to increase the loads to represent what we'd expect to see in those 3 days during this heat wave. And then we've run it, the base case, and we've added the offshore one, and then we've included the heat wave. We've examined what happens to the interregional flows in these various cases, and this Costas puts these together. It's really a pretty helpful way to maybe in a snapshot get to see what the production cost model is showing us. And basically what you see is that imports from Northwest and Southwest, from the Northwest region and the Southwest region, you can see the kind of the dotted lines here. Of course, with the middle image here, offshore wind, Southern Coast offshore wind does result in some increase in flows south into California at this amount, 2.7 gigawatts of power flows. Remember, that's larger than 2.7 gigawatts of installed capacity. And then once we add the heat wave, of course, there's even additional load in California, and there's a pull from, of course, the Southwest, but also additionally from the Northwest. This is all leading up to the final piece of this resilience check, which will be, okay, now deactivate COE or partially de-energize COE to the extent of which we haven't settled upon yet. But that'll be kind of our, there's a lot of breadth to this study, but this will kind of be our resilience. We'd like to do a lot of these, but this will kind of be our resilience stress on the system. And we'd like to evaluate this with multiple generation plus transmission designs. Let's see. Yeah, this we want to also indicate that we've done some work in other projects. This kind of a hydropower microgrid-based wildfire resilience project that Sahom, who is the power systems lead in the study, he's on the phone as well. He's been leading this work. So this we haven't done this yet, but we plan to include the wildfire burn probability data in the evaluation of the resilience of this event. The event, offshore wind transmission may mitigate some of this, may allow for some reduction in unserved energy. That's what we're speculating. Probably not in this scenario one, but we also need to know the probability of occurrence of this outage in terms of rolling this up into some sort of a monetary value that one could use to weigh this benefit against other benefits. Okay, let's see. We're getting tight on time. The last two scenarios are going to be built off of the same, more aggressively decarbonized representation of the Western interconnection. So here we take we take the WEC 2030 ADS, and then there are a few things that we do change even in the base case for the scenario one. There's some BC hydro scheduling that needs to be updated in that 2030 ADS. And then we add 35 gigawatts of new wind and solar, which basically fills up the existing transmission on the West Coast to the point where any more, and this is all mostly land-based wind and solar. There's 3 gigawatts of Diablo Canyon in here, but offshore wind. But for the most part, we're trying to push the system until curtailment starts to rise too high, and too high being 15% of any single generator. And we get about 35 gigawatts of additional VRE in there. And then that becomes the base case for our addition for offshore wind in scenario 2 and 3. There is one other thing we add. We go to the CAISO transmission plan and specifically the 20-year outlook concept. And there's some interesting things they've done here to enable North Coast offshore wind. And in particular, we model the Collinsville substation, the links from Dixon to Collinsville back to Tesla, and then the potential for HVDC to land at Collinsville. And then also the 230 kV to the Pittsburgh substation, which is called out by CAISO. Okay, so here's the basic approach that we're taking to define these scenarios. We keep the same bottom-up frame, just like we did with the scenario one. We look at the onshore system first. We consider what the production cost model, but also what power flow studies and contingency sweeps can tell us is supportable by major buses across the West Coast. I mean, mostly running from Portland-ish down to San Francisco, let's say. And then we identify where the system can absorb that offshore wind without pushing curtailment beyond 20% is how we started this. And then we eventually back down till we get a zero curtailment case or near zero curtailment case, and then define the generation to meet and transmission to send that power to those buses without curtailment. That's all done primarily through production cost modeling. But then we need to do some power flow studies to make sure that's supportable, again, from that contingency perspective. And then finally, the last step will be to design transmission that supports that. So we also, some folks who've been on the phone in the past have heard us talk about this optimization problem that we framed. We have added a transmission cost penalty to this problem. If you have questions about the framing of the optimization, I can maybe take those later since we're kind of low on time. And we ended up with these optimization results. So first we optimize for generation and capacity, and then we put the penalty on. That's a really important distinction. Then we put the penalty on the transmission, not all at once. So it's first done was optimize generation capacity benefits, and then penalize transmission. So what ends up happening is we identify portions of this optimum for a larger, the black dots are kind of a larger 20 gigawatt type optimum, and then we see where we want the power for Grace Harbor to come from, the power from Portland to come from, the power for San Francisco to come from. And then we identify this is a manual process where cut this up and we identify, square area in the ocean which could represent a wind project. And then we identify centroids and link them together and link the transmission through those centroids, which are shown here in green. So here's what we end up with, something kind of like this. So we can see from these general areas, Grace Harbor is the SATSOP substation. In Portland, we're looking at Alston and Trojan, places that can handle some additional power flows. All these buses, one's in Lane, Fairview, Dixonville, Fairview, you can sub in Rogue for Fairview. That's scenario one right there. So this is all in addition to scenario one. It includes all the scenario one work. In that way, it's a pathway, one scenario then leads to the next. And we'll see if we can keep that going between 2 and 3. I'm not sure. Then we have Tesla that we're targeting to land some power on the kind of the inside of the bay, the east side of the bay there. And then, all right, it's not actually on the bay, it's a bit further inland. But then we have these buses in San Francisco, San Mateo, Potrero, and Martin, and finally Moss Landing in this list. Okay, that is it. So I think these slides are out of order, but let's just say next steps are to run power flow checks on these proposed scenarios 2 and 3. 2 will probably be radial LCC type HVDC. And scenario 3, if we can do it, it'll be a more sophisticated HVDC concept. The models don't exist for these things, so it's a little, I don't want to promise it. It's challenging. Then we want to design Of course, yeah, well, I guess that's what I'm saying. First, we're doing the power flow contingency checks, and then we're running the designing the transmission concepts to be represented in power flow and PCM models, and critical hours of the year for the power flow side. And then all of this rolls up into the valuation method, which I won't show you now. You've seen it in the past. Some of you, it's probably too much to talk about right now, but I could take questions as you guys have them. So general feedback, please. Anything you've got, we'll take. I'm sorry we're so low on time.
Thanks, Travis. I think we can squeeze in some questions, and I think also we certainly have every option to schedule additional meetings as we go forward with more detail about the studies. So does anyone have any questions here with the few minutes we have left?
Bill, I see Marty Schwartz had some questions in the chat section.
Hey, Marty.
Yeah, so the question about the curtailment threshold, how did you come up with that 15% or 20? What's the thinking?
Yeah, it's a pretty general, I mean, it's a subjective call. The thought was, we aren't doing a lot of capacity expansion here, as you probably noticed, Marty. So we're using the current transmission system. We believe that there will be a need to curtail to hit the targets that people want to see, given how hard it is to build transmission. But is there any specific reason why 15 or 20? Not really. We just try to stuff for case 3, try to stuff. A lot of that came out of national transmission planning work. So, trying to stuff the system as much as possible, but still be able to use and leverage these WEC base cases. And then the 20% was just the way that was what we used to help us kind of funnel down to, what kind of offshore wind power flows might be supported in different areas. And then once we found that, then we just continued to whittle those down until we had 0% curtailment through the PCM.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That helps. I've had to make an assumption about this kind of thing before, and it always felt arbitrary. So
yeah, great question. Thanks, Marty.
All right, Chip.
Chip, if you're
You
talking,
need to unmute.
Sorry. Did you run scenarios for a heavy winter condition and for a light load with heavy wind conditions?
We would like to do, we haven't, that's a great question, Chip. We haven't done that yet. So Home is on the phone. We would like to do that. That kind of gets to, so we're trying to get the dispatch from the PCM and then map that to the power flow model. And once we have that mapping, then we can pick those kind of hours, and we could do, like you said, heavy winter, heavy summer, maybe a heavy load, low wind, all those stress cases. I will just tell you, I think we're going to run out of runway on some of this to get it all done in time, but I would love to do that, Chip. So what cases would you recommend? You mentioned
I suspect that you may find that heavy wind and light load may be your worst case.
okay. Is that a stability concern?
It changes the dynamics in your power flow dramatically, and you lose a lot of the load that's on the coast. And you'll find that your wind is spreading further inland and further north and further south.
Okay. Taking a note, Chip. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks for that. We've got time for one last question. Ibrahim.
Thanks, Travis, for the presentation, the material, and especially you mentioned collector system. There is no model available, exactly the case, and I'm glad that your team, worked on that and prepared it. One question on that is the assumption you made for inter-array cable from one turbine to another turbine. Is it going kind of down to the bottom of the ocean, or is just the kind of what was the assumption on inter-array cables?
Yeah, no, not going down to the seafloor, definitely not. So I suppose it is, I guess, like, what do you call that, semi-submersible? I'm not sure, but it's, yeah. But Shanawaz, I don't know if you had anything you'd like to come off mute and add, since you did this work.
Yeah, I think we just considered some of the undersea cables. We have not really tried to go much detail into like whether it is submersible or whether it is buried undersea. Yeah, for 230 kV undersea transmission, we are certainly considering buried cables. but not for 66 kV.
Okay, all right.
But
Thanks.
John Wise, I think importantly, we didn't assume lengths that run from the turbine down to the seafloor 1,000 meters and back up 1,000 meters, you know, in terms
Right.
of lengths. We didn't do that, right?
Yeah, we didn't do that.
Okay. I don't know if there is time on one other question I had quickly is that I think it was a slide 9 when you showed the path flows, and it seemed that one more. Yeah, I was wondering, path 65 is HVDC going to coming to California, but goes to LADWP, but path 66 come to California. Any reason that during like summer months, path 65 in DC has more flow than COI? I was just wondering, it's a obvious reason for it compared to base.
That is a good question. Wow, I do not know off the top of my head why that would be, unless someone else does, like Costas. But to me, I don't know why they wouldn't. Like in a perfect world, why wouldn't they be balanced? Yeah.
Travis, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Costas.
Yeah, I think this has to do also with the thermal limits, and we need to see if the path 66 is maxing that limit during that month, but path 65 is not. So that would be a guess. But yeah, having the path limits on the same plot could shed some light on this question.
Okay, okay. Because COI is 4,800. Maybe we can discuss this offline, the
4,800,
detail. So yeah, the details we can discuss later. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, Ibrahim, or anyone else too. You know, if you can reach out later. I know we're kind of out of time now, but we would love to set up a call with anyone or and talk through these results in greater detail. These are preliminary, and you know we have a lot more coming, but it's great to have these kinds of questions and help shape what we're doing.
For sure. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're running a little late here, so let's go ahead and finish for today. Travis, thank you so much. You and the rest of the team from PNL and NREL. Great work y'all are doing, and we recognize how important this is going to be to the long-term build out of offshore wind. And so we want to be helpful for everyone on the call. You know, PNL is looking for feedback on these studies, so feel free to reach out through Bill, Henry, myself, Travis. We can get you their contact information if you don't have it. And we very much appreciate your participation today. We are always looking for concepts that the audience would be interested in exploring in future versions of the POTS meeting. So feel free to reach out about that. If there's something that you're interested in, we'd love to explore it with you. I think we heard one today got my own heads thinking about it, about community resilience. We recognize how important that's going to be. So any final comments, questions from the group today? All right, well, we'll call it a wrap then. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Travis.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bill. Bye.